Thank you, Isabella. I did exactly what I said I wasn't going to do and clicked leave rather than share. Anyway, Fleur, you're up first.
Great, so I'm assuming everyone can see my slides okay. So yeah, I shall get going. So yeah, as Victoria said, I'm Fleur Hughes and I'm a PRISMs manager at York. So I'm going to, oh, someone just mute that. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk about our journey towards having a PRISM pool so far. We don't have one yet. We might be teetering on the brink. So I'm just going to talk a bit about how we reached this point where we got our ideas and information from, the model that we're proposing to adopt, and I'll just finish with a few reflections on some of the arguments that I've used that I think have been most effective in getting this attention so far. So the groundwork for this began in 2022 when I set up our local PRISM network using funding from the Research England Research Culture Fund. As part of that piece of work, I wrote a report on the current state of play for PRISMs at York. And to do that, one of the things I did was go out and interview some people and get some case studies which featured successful pool models. So in the report, I made some recommendations, one of which was to explore having a pool model. I think the thing that I learned most from that experience was that actually not all of the PRISMs at York were really keen on doing that. I kind of put it out there and thought, oh yeah, everybody's just going to be champing at the bit to be able to do this, but that wasn't really the case. Some people were very hesitant about it. So it's really made me sort of think about, you know, whenever you have a pool, there's always going to be a trade-off between the amount of job security you want and the amount of choice you want over what you do. So we've been sort of trying to think about that and balance that in terms of what we've been proposing so far to make sure that it's something that's going to work for everybody. So then over the next year or so, I was developing that. So the report was a really, really useful document that I used to try and influence key stakeholders. So we had a newly set up research culture working group, which I became a member of. So that was a very useful platform to get the message out there and raise awareness and gather support. We also had a change program going on at the time around end-to-end research support. So I was getting engaged with that. And there were also conversations going on with the science faculty, particularly because they were having a few challenges over some specific projects and trying to get PRISMs in post that were sort of making some of these issues very real for them. And out of that period, we had the PRISMs manager role was created. It's sort of the Wellcome Trust Research Culture funding has been kind of a catalyst for getting it done now rather than in the next 2 or 3 years. Mostly that role is there to act on the recommendations from the report that I wrote, which obviously includes exploring putting a pool model into place. So I've spent a lot of time trying to gather data. I think it's really important to have, you know, a solid evidence base to make the argument on and not just have it all kind of vibes based. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand what our current landscape is and answer simple basic questions like how many PRISMs are there actually at York? Spoiler alert, still don't actually know. But also I thought it was really important to try and understand the edge cases and the weird bits at the university. So really, I've spent a lot of time going out and speaking to individual people to really understand what's going on in different departments and different areas, because I thought there's a real risk of accidentally messing up something that's working perfectly fine for somebody else just by not being aware of everything that's going on. I've tried to sort of frame that data collection and in terms of answering the question of, you know, what is the current system costing the university? What are the, you know, what is business as usual now and what are the disadvantages of that? Trying to frame it in that way, as well as setting it in, you know, what is the sector-wide landscape as well, both in terms of funders and what the requirements are from them, as well as what other institutions are doing. So I've had lots of conversations with fellow panel members to be aware of what they're doing, which has been incredibly helpful. So having gathered all of that information, I've then spent the last few months particularly thinking about informing and persuading. So I've tried to identify who are my sponsors, both in the science faculty where my role is based and the central research office. Who are the people that are influential, able to, you know, make the case for me, who are enthusiastic about this. And I've also been sort of sharing those ideas and discussing them with the people that are affected. So obviously, particularly academics, professional services staff, just again, sort of sharing those ideas as widely as I can. And I put those into a short paper so that there's a written document for people to refer to for the outline proposal. And I have presented that as our faculty executive board informally. So that's kind of as far as I have got. The next bit is the sort of little grey bit at the bottom that hasn't happened yet, which is just the decision and hopefully implementation. I've sort of done all of the informing bit, and people sort of say, oh yes, we're going to talk about that and we'll get back to you. And it's gone a bit quiet. So I'm now in the phase of trying to prod everybody sufficiently that they don't forget that I'm there and it doesn't completely fall off the agenda, whilst trying not to prod so much that they get really cross with me and tell me to go away. So that's kind of where that's got up to, and we shall see where it goes. I said I'd talk about the model that I'm going to do. Please forgive my basic diagrams. I realise this looks like some sort of disease, but this is intended to represent the current picture at York for PRISMs. So we've got a few like high intensity research areas where you see a very consistent high level of funding, grant after grant after grant. And what we see there is that we see a much more structured way of employing PRISMs. So these green blobs are the PRISMs that tend to work within those high intensity research areas, and they stay there. So they might come in for one particular grant, but then they'll get costed onto the next grant and the next grant and the next grant. So they're not pools contractually. They don't look any different to the rest of the PRISM space at York, but in reality these posts are already a lot more stable and secure, and they work together as a team, so they have a lot more sort of mutual peer support, and they're line managed by other PRISMs as well. So I would often describe people in these spaces, not exclusively, but a lot of people in those spaces would be in what you might describe I-shaped careers. So they've come in on a particular research topic, they've stayed in that area, they've developed a relatively narrow but very deep knowledge, and they want to stay in that area. They do not like the idea of being twanged across the university to work on a completely different project. By contrast, then, we have the rest of our PRISMs who are scattered all across the university. They're working on orphaned projects where the PI is acting as like a sole trader. They have to do all of the recruitment and the management of the PRISMs. There is no structure or coordination to these roles. So often the careers in these spaces I might describe as T-shaped careers, certainly how I describe mine. So I've gone in on one particular area, but then you've branched off into lots of different areas, worked on different types of projects in different research areas. So you've gathered a relatively shallow but very broad range of knowledge and experience, and that's highly transferable to other areas. Certainly if you're like me, someone says, we could twang you across the university and work in a completely different department on a totally different topic tomorrow, I would think, yes, please, let me at it. So in theory, the redeployment process should be the mechanism that keeps these people in the university and keeps those skills and that knowledge within the university, but we know it's not. It's completely ineffectual at doing that. And what we know that happens is that people in these roles are going elsewhere. They're leaving the institution, or they're leaving PRISM career paths and they're going on to something else because it's more stable for them. So the proposal is that we don't touch the high intensity research areas. They've got a structure, they're happy, they don't want to be moved around. But instead, what we do is we start a pilot pool that would bring some of those T-shaped PRISM roles into a structure where they could be assigned to different projects as they come online. So it will be an opt-in model. You'd have to choose to be part of that pool. There'll be a new job description that's more generic. It's not related to one specific project. You would apply for that. If you were successful, your project would come with you into the pool. So that then becomes the start of our pool projects, so that we don't then have a whole bunch of projects that don't have a PRISM. And then new grant applications, as they're being developed, they would come to the pool. They would ask us to advise on what's the appropriate grade and FTE for the project that they're devising, and we would assign them a PRISM from the pool. It would be small scale initially so that we get that proof of concept and obviously reduce the financial risk to the university. But over time, as demand grows, we would hope that we would see that all of those orphaned projects are actually going to be managed from the pool, so that we've sort of solved that problem and that everybody is benefiting from the stability and the structure that you get there. I'll just very briefly talk about some of the arguments that I think have had the strongest response from senior management and academics that I got from the data collection that I was doing at York. So we had 57 recruitment processes for just 53 posts, just within a 2-year period. That definitely caused a few jaws to drop. And some of those 53 posts had no recruitment processes because people were written into the bids, and some of those posts had multiple recruitment processes. And you can extrapolate up from that figure as well when you think about how many people are involved in each of those recruitment processes, how many days were there, how many people on those recruitment panels were on professors' salaries. So you can attach an actual figure of time and money to that if you wanted to. The other ones that we've got, 2/3 of our projects start without a PRISM, and 1/3 of projects lose their PRISM during the course of the project, sometimes multiple times. Those particular figures come from York, that's from the data I gathered, but from an initial look at the national data we've got from our recent survey, I think that's borne out as well. So I think you'd be fairly safe in kind of using those sorts of figures as an argument without having to go out and do a lot of data collection for yourself. But clearly that represents a huge amount of disruption and lost time and productivity on all of these research projects. The other arguments that I have that are less quantitative and a little bit more vibes based, but have still had a response, are these ones. So reputational risk. So where we see, funders looking at us questioningly when we've had challenges to service our larger scale high profile projects, I can point to a couple of specific examples at York where we've had challenges around that, and people, that's a pain point. So being able to say to people, remember that experience? If we do this, we won't have to do that again. Similarly with the sort of financial risk, I said sort of specifically around grading, but the redundancy payments is a risk for everyone. If you've been in post for more than 2 years at York, even if you're on a fixed term contract, if you can't find another role through redeployment or other means, if you end up being made redundant, your redundancy payment is going to come from the central pot, and there's no money in the central pot, so people don't want to be having to make redundancy payments. There's also, again, specific examples I can give around people trying to get role regrades when posts have been undergraded, and the huge time sink and effort that's gone into trying to resolve those situations has just, been a massive waste of time. So just again, having a few real life examples I can point to of when this has cost us, I think is helpful. The full economic cost under recovery, I don't have any data around this specifically for PRISMs, although I wish I did. But the link there is for a paper that was published that says, obviously on UKRI grants, we're supposed to be getting 80% FEC, but on average the sector is getting 70%. I would argue that if you've got a decent PRISM on a project, they're going to get the full cost recovery on it, but I can't back that up with any data. But again, for the sector, that's quite a persuasive argument if you can say, put a little bit of money in here and we'll make sure you get full cost recovery. And then finally, just pointing to what's the direction of travel with funders. There's more and more requirements for a realistic management plan, and saying, your project application is less likely to be funded if you suddenly cut the PRISM time down to 5%, to manage some huge grant. It's not going to look realistic, and particularly if PRISMs are included on funding panels, for example, they're going to be scrutinising your management plan and telling you if they really think you haven't costed it correctly. So that's it from me, a kind of quick rundown of where we've got to so far in our situation. Really looking forward to discussion and hearing from other colleagues as well. And I shall stop sharing.
Thanks, Fleur. It's really interesting to hear about arguments that have landed, and unsurprising that a lot of those arguments have been quantitative. Let's move on to Lorelei.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I can't see anybody now. I can just see my screen, so I'm just talking to my computer.
We can see you, don't worry.
Good, great. Okay. So I'm from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and I'll talk about our journey so far. Where we are currently is that we've got approval for a two-year pilot of a programme management resource centre. We've got jobs descriptions in place, but they're not yet filled, and centre isn't yet established. So we're kind of there. We're slightly further along than Fleur's in that we're over the line in terms of approval, but not yet in terms of setting up. So I'll talk about the process of developing the concept, getting it approved, what made the circumstances right at this time to propose it, what helped sell it, and some of the things that we had to consider during that. So a little bit of context about LSTM. We are a small and specialist higher education institute. We have only around 600 staff across 4 academic departments. So we are relatively small compared to a lot of others. We're also research intensive. I think around 80% of our income is from research. And as a result of that, research programme management staff are widely used and have become very well established within the institution. We do have quite an established career pathway for research programme support staff, ranging from research administrators through coordinators, officers, managers and senior managers, which correspond to the different grades. And as an aside, I think making those job titles consistent across the grades and having a career pathway for this cadre has really helped to underpin the programme manager role, helped with kind of recognition and the role that programme managers play in research, which I think has been an important foundation in this whole step of how we kind of then move in towards a pool of research managers. All of our programme management support staff are based within research teams, which does mean they're quite siloed. Programme managers tend to be line managed by the senior academic within their group, and there isn't like a overall programme management oversight within the institution in terms of the approaches we use or any advocacy for that group. And I think all of these things kind of lead into the potential role for programme management pool, kind of helping with communication and networking and collaboration across those across the cadre, and kind of sharing resources and information better. So in terms of what made the time right to propose this right now, we are partway through a Wellcome Trust Research Culture funding project, the objectives of which centred around improving research management. So while establishing a pool, a kind of resource centre for programme management wasn't one of the objectives of that programme, the implementation of a 2-year programme that focused on research management just led to more discussion about research programme management, the value it adds to programmes, how it's resourced and accessed and supported, and how it can be kind of made more effective and efficient within LSTM. Also, the lead of that Wellcome Trust project is a member of the LSTM leadership, and so her kind of support, and not only support but kind of drive of this concept, I think really was one of the major factors in having it approved. Having that kind of leadership support or backing to what we're trying to do, I think really kind of helped to kind of move it forward and get it through the approval process. So what we asked for in terms of the resource centre was a senior programme manager to be overseeing the whole thing, kind of setting it up, managing the staff, allocating work, marketing to academic departments, a programme manager, an officer, an administrator. We did consider having 2 programme managers to reflect the 2 different faculties we have at LSTM, but we decided in the end to start smaller and hopefully grow to that size if we're successful. And the proposal is for all of these roles to be underwritten by core funding as opposed to being project funded as they are currently within research programmes. What we got after that had been through the budget committee was not far off. The mid-range programme officer role was dropped to keep costs down, because there's obviously a lot of competing priorities for the budget. So we're not too far off what we asked for. So this is what our resource centre will look like once it's established. So in terms of how we designed what we were trying to do with the resource centre, we were very clear that we're not intending to replace the programme managers based within teams. And I think this reflects what Fleur was just saying about the kind of high intense research areas that have kind of those people who've been working in there long term, and kind of don't want to be pulled out into a pool. So quite some time ago, maybe like 12 years ago at LSTM, there was a suggestion from within senior management that all programme managers should be brought within into a programme management centralised pool. And while I think that was based on good intentions of addressing challenges of career pathways and short-term contracts, it was also wildly unpopular with those people who didn't want to be taken away from their research teams, from the partnerships, from that kind of close ownership you have with research when you're based within a team. So we're being very clear that we're not trying to do that again. We're not revisiting that idea, but we're offering another option alongside the existing models for how we allow people how we support people to access programme management. And that's possibly for those who don't have those kind of long-term, well-established groups who need somewhere to start in building their teams. So thinking about some of the key selling points, not only to management to get the budget approved, but also how we'll sell it to PIs and research teams as we set up the centre. Not only will it help reduce the admin burden on academic staff, but there's also that sense of support. We do have a lot of academics who maybe, like I say, don't have big or established teams around them, or maybe just starting out, perhaps some new stuff, and they can feel kind of maybe quite isolated in terms of having to kind of grow their portfolio and their reputation without any institutional support. So having that kind of like ability to easily access programme management support in the short term, and taking away that commitment of then having to be responsible for that person's long-term kind of career for more than the first few months, I think will really help people to just start with growing with their teams and their portfolios. And as I say, it prevents the need to do a full recruitment and have maybe 2 years worth of funding. It allows people to kind of access support in a much more easy and flexible way. Obviously, it also helps us to retain some of that programme management expertise within LSTM. As has already been said, people have been leaving their roles as a project is coming to an end, and it means that expertise and that knowledge leaves with them. We've also looked at how it will get better money from the more senior programme management staff within research teams who have quite small admin support or quite small support staff groups. If you have a senior manager and the administrator maybe has left or got maternity leave or sick leave or needs to be or is being recruited, then the senior programme management staff do end up doing the travel booking and the meeting arrangements, because those things need doing. So if you've got more ease of access to administrative support, then that means that the more senior staff can to focus on the kind of the things that they are employed for, and the value for money of all the different participants within the team kind of really increases. We've also seen it's an opportunity to help with capacity development support for our global partners. A lot of our international partners are in different stages of developing their research programme management models, and having a team that's focused on that we've seen as a kind of selling point to help support those institutions. And it's been really helpful to be able to learn to share some of the lessons that have been learned from other institutions who've done this. We spoke to some of the people who are presenting today about their experience. So I think kind of having that confidence that other people have done this and found kind of what the good practices or what the best way to address some of the challenges are has really helped us to be able to go, we're not just kind of wishing into the wind here. We are kind of like following in the footsteps of people who have done this before us. So some of the considerations, and I guess some of these maybe aren't fully resolved yet. And the first one really was went backwards and forwards quite a lot once the budget was approved. How far the the resource centre would recover all of its costs versus provide some kind of strategic support that isn't chargeable within research teams, was quite a point of discussion. Some heads of department were very keen to see the pool being available to support with grant applications, support kind of new members of staff, possibly in ways that don't have a cost recovery element to them. So kind of how much management wanted to make sure we fully recovered our costs versus providing some of that strategic support that isn't cost recoverable, kind of went backwards and forwards a little bit before we were able to move forward, because everybody saw a slightly different opportunity for what the resource centre would be able to support with. When we were looking at the costing model, we also needed to find a financial model that would suit any funder, because obviously the funder was unknown at the time of putting, together the resource centre concept, because it would have to be applicable to any of the funders. So, for example, if we were looking at charging a markup on some of the staff time, that wouldn't be acceptable to some of the funders. So we had to find a way of recovering costs as fully as possible that would actually still suit all funders. We've also thought about, the need for having a minimum or a maximum deployment FTE. We don't want a member of staff being deployed to 10 different projects for 10% FTE each. So we looked at having a minimum deployment allocation. On the other hand, we do want to be as flexible as possible. If someone only needs 20% for a few weeks, and we want to be able to meet those needs. So we're kind of thinking about how we'll do that to meet the needs of the research teams, but also be workable as possible for the staff who are working within the centre. The amount of time that we deployed of the senior programme manager who will be overseeing the centre has been discussed. Certainly in the immediate term, that role will be setting up the centre, providing, kind of setting up the team and working with research teams to kind of identify the pipeline and kind of understand their needs. As it becomes more established, we think perhaps then there will be more opportunity for that senior manager to kind of be deploying some of their time. It's not costed currently like that, but I think again that's something we'll see within the pilots about how much time spare that senior role has to provide support across the school. We also want to look at how we'll avoid the competition within those existing administrative teams, and particularly those who are already working across maybe departments or teams and are maybe doing something similar to what we're doing, but in a less formalised way. So, we don't want to create competition. We don't want to make people feel threatened. So we want to make sure that we're providing a different service and a different approach, so that we're not kind of pushing anybody else's positions out. And we're also looking at how we'll be evaluating, because there's many factors that could contribute to success, and so which one of those, if we have more success in one area than another, will it still be considered a successful pilot? So that's where we are now. It feels like quite an abrupt end to presentation, because we don't have a nice conclusion to answer some of these questions. And we do still have a lot of unknowns, like how much demand we'll have, or what type of role will be the most demand for. We are seeing this very much as a pilot, and an opportunity to learn and to kind of find out what some of the right answers or what's best answers to those questions are. And we're really pleased that we're able to learn from other people. So while I'm happy to answer any questions on our journey so far, I'm sure I'll also be asking questions of the next couple of presenters who've got a little bit further along in their journeys. So that's all from me now, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Lorelei. That was very good to hear. If you have questions, please do start putting them in the chat, and we can work our way through them after our third and final presenters. So I'm going to hand over to Ciara.
Thanks, Victoria. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes.
Cool. So as Victoria said, I'm Ciara Wilton. I head up the research project management team at the University of Edinburgh. I should say we were at one point known as the Flexible Resource Centre, so I kind of use the terms a little bit interchangeably, and different people might have spoken to me at different times and used different things. But basically, we are based in Edinburgh Research Office, which is a central department at the University of Edinburgh. We have both project managers and project administrators who are deployed out from the central department across our 3 colleges to support the management and delivery of externally funded research projects. So I'm going to kind of talk through our journey and how we kind of got to this point, and talk through the pilot, and then sort of talk a little bit more about how the team operates today. So, oh, it's not moving. So we originated as part of the Growing Research Together programme. So a little bit of a different background to kind of everybody else's. So this was a change programme that was looking at how to improve university research support ecosystem so that it could thrive in an increasingly competitive and dynamic funding environment. And GRT first proceeded through an initial design phase. And in this phase, they identified a gap in project management capabilities. So this will probably be things that we're all aware of. And this gap largely stems from temporary contracting, and with the result that there's a lack of job security for project professionals. They're also leaving halfway through a project, and notably in that last year, meaning that projects don't have that continuity and consistency. As a university, we're losing skills and knowledge, and we've kind of got this continual need to recruit that kind of Fleur has some data around in the first presentation. And that obviously takes time. It means there's delays with starting projects, there's gaps in support, and it also means that we're not maximising our cost recovery fund for that kind of budget line. As we're probably also all aware, research has become increasingly complex, and there's kind of a more demand for the kind of dedicated support and coordination. And we also kind of realise there's kind of a huge lack in understanding of project professional roles and what they do. So what does a project manager do, and how does it benefit your project and the delivery of that project? And we found that some PIs weren't even aware that you cost in project-based support to a grant. So there was kind of this whole kind of need as well to educate as part of setting up this central resource. And we also found with that, because there was a lack of understanding, we had people employed at the same grades across the university, but doing very different roles and having very different responsibilities. So one of that was a problem that we were also hoping to address. And then finally, siloed working. Often project managers are employed on temporary contracts that are very much linked to that project, and they're kind of very much embedded in the project team, but not necessarily in the kind of wider ecosystem. And therefore, there kind of wasn't that training, for example, kind of wasn't there. There was also that lack of collective voice and support. And so that meant there was a kind of like continual reinvention of the wheel. And often we were kind of finding quite a decreased job satisfaction because of that. So at the same time that GRT sort of identified this gap in project management capabilities, it also advanced flexible resourcing as a model to improve access to some research capabilities, one being project management, but also a number of other capabilities. And the idea was that flexible resourcing kind of pools those specialised professionals, trains them in common and consistent ways of working, and then they can be accessed from across the university. And the hope was this would kind of build organisational resilience through the provision of consistency and continuity, minimise risk via kind of compliance and introducing those standard ways of working, and improve equitability of accessing resource. And also, it was also hoped that these kind of resource centres would create professional communities of practice and kind of provide that creation and that connection across different people doing the sort of similar jobs. So basically we had a flexible resourcing model kind of pushed in advance, and then we had the gap in project management. So it's decided that we would look at flexible resourcing via project management. And that was kind of endorsed by the GRT programme board, and then we kind of had a mandate, an early improvement initiative mandate, and that kind of involved running a pilot. So so I kind of took over a bit at this stage, and it was kind of asked me, can you kind of start running a flexible resource centre? And I was like, but what is that and how is it going to work? So we kind of took a bit of a step back, and we kind of first of all did a scoping phase just to kind of gain a greater understanding of what the current challenge was and what the future need was, and actually just how to begin to implement this. So I engaged lots of other universities who had kind of thought about this, were in the process of implementing a pool, had already got something that was quite well established, to kind of gain their learnings and their understandings, and just kind of talk through them with how they'd implemented their pools. We tried to kind of do some data analysis on kind of the major bids and projects that come into Edinburgh to try and understand maybe potentially what the pipeline would be. And also just try to understand how many project managers, project administrators that we recruit at Edinburgh. And that proved really, really difficult. That data is really, really hard to extract, to find. So that was a real big challenge, basically. So I think we kind of were lacking that kind of quantifiable evidence that kind of Fleur particularly spoke about in the beginning. So that is, I think, a huge challenge that we're all kind of facing together. We did lots of engagement with key internal stakeholders. We held a workshop with project managers to kind of understand what their views were on this. We also didn't want it to feel like it was something that was happening to them, but not something they were being considered in as well, and what they thought the best potential model would be. And then what we did kind of have was a very small pool of project managers. We had 2 project managers, essentially. Not a pool is a bit of a grand word. And they were employed on temporary contracts. They were in Edinburgh Research Office. And the Edinburgh Research Office tends to get what we call the orphan projects, the projects that don't exist in a college or a school. But what we had done is we had been able to move a big project from the College of Science and Engineering into Edinburgh Research Office, with the idea that there was going to be this kind of pool being set up. So that person, the project manager who came through, was employed on an open-ended contract. So we had 1 person employed on an open-ended contract, but 3 project managers, but they were all bought out at 100%. So there was no kind of flexibility or capacity within the team, but we kind of were able to start understanding what worked and what didn't work as a team. So we then moved over into a test and learn phase. I suppose kind of what I was quite lucky about in contrast is that I didn't have to kind of produce any evidence to run a test and learn. It was kind of part of this early improvement initiative. It was underwritten by the change programme, so it was costed into that rather than within a particular department. And the idea was that at one point we were going to model and then do a pilot, but because we didn't know the remit of the model or the scale of it, we kind of sat down to design and we just couldn't figure it out. Will we design something for a particular college, for a particular school, something that spanned the whole of the university? So actually we decided, let's just pilot, see how we get, and then kind of work out the model if the kind of pilot is accepted and we move into sort of business as usual. So we ran the pilot. Over that kind of time, we recruited more on open-ended contracts, and also the team gained capacity of those original 3 projects kind of drew to an end. So we therefore had that kind of flexibility in the team, and we were able to start kind of supporting projects across the university. So we supported different funders, different types of deployments. We had sort of some more longer term deployments, some short term deployments where people deployed at 100%, people deployed at different kind of fractional percentages to see what worked. We supported clinical trials. So we kind of just tried to support as widely as possible as we could in this kind of pilot stage. And that pilot lasted about a year, and it was considered a success in the sense that we were in demand, and the support we had provided had benefited these projects, and we were able to recover the costs. And it was kind of, we then wrote up all the findings, or I wrote up all the findings and recommendations, and produced a paper to the board that was endorsed by the provost to embed the Flexible Resource Centre then into ERO business as usual. So we then kind of started a transition into business as usual. We continued supporting the projects we'd committed to. We continued to promote the service, and I worked with a consultant in organisational change to design that operational and financial model. And that kind of got approved by the department. And the idea was we'd grow to a 12-person team, almost kind of without having secured the projects yet to support that team. Unfortunately, then we kind of realised the financial situation that the sector is in, and the ability to grow in that way has decreased quite a lot. So we haven't been able to grow as we had once planned. So what is the kind of research project management team today? So we have a mix of project managers and project administrators. So I have, there's 4 project managers and 2 project administrators. And then I am 50 to 70% deployed on projects as a senior research project manager, and 30 to 50% managing the team. So everybody else, though, is deployed at 100%. So when I kind of did the initial scoping phase, there's lots of thoughts about what should be how much should a person be deployed, and should some time be retained for professional development, and in order to maintain your flexibility so you don't quite go to 100, so you can kind of move people around a little bit more easily and provide cover during sort of periods of contingency and during periods of absence. We kind of have gone for that 100%. Partly that's to make the team more viable in the current climate. And there was this argument that actually projects, if you're employing a project manager, the project should be funding their professional development. That's an expectation that everybody has as an employee. So in the first year, we kind of just finished our first year. We have attained 100% for everybody, and so we have been able to recover all our costs as expected and not draw down from the core service, from the core department budget. Sorry. We have relatively defined service options in the sense that we provide long-term support, short-term support, and project startup support. And these can either be 100% or a sort of any sort or fractional. We tend not to deploy at less than 20%, and largely that's because one person then isn't managing any more than sort of 4 to 5 projects, and just with meetings and just things like that, the demands, just so they're not having so much demands on their time essentially. And we have kind of learned that it's quite, if people are across different projects, it can be useful to consider when their key milestones are, so you can kind of make sure that nobody has got sort of like 3 reporting requirements in one go, just so they can sort of manage that. But the aim is really that projects can sort of tailor the support to their specific needs. So, if they need someone at a short term, they can get that, but they need the longer term support, they can get that. But also, I think, as Lorelei said, that you weren't getting a grade 8 doing meeting minutes sort of, so you were able to kind of also potentially have 40% of a higher grade and then sort of 30% of a project administrator. I should say we don't tend to put our project administrators on projects unless there is a kind of project manager or somebody else in a project management kind of type role, so they're not working just directly with a PI, so they're our grade 5s, and just to kind of offer them that sort of bit of protection. We tend to consider all requests on a case-by-case basis, and one thing that we did learn that became quite important was that as those requests came in, we learned it was really important to keep schools up to date with our support being requested. So there was that transparency. Although some schools and colleges are really behind us, other schools are less. They kind of want to keep people within their school. They're not super keen about having the project management sort of being recruited or come from an external central team. So we do kind of make sure they're fully up to date when I get a request, and they're kind of kept up to date with the as that kind of request is worked out and whether or not we do provide that support. And it also means that the school finance can approve that there is that budget there to actually that is that budget there in the project, which I check as well, but they kind of felt that they needed to have that sort of oversight over it as well. We operate via relatively loose boundaries. This was another big thing that came up when I was sort of looking at how different pools were set up. It was kind of communicated that it was really important to have boundaries, and once you have those boundaries, to kind of keep with them and to kind of make sure you maintain them. So ours are quite loose in the sense that we will kind of consider support for any externally funded research project. We don't support clinical trials. There's a clinical trials unit in Edinburgh, and they are much better to provide that support than we are, and so that's something that we don't do. And we do our support is in that project delivery stage. So that project has to be live, and we have to be able to recuperate the salary from that project. So I do get asked a lot about sort of setting up a project. It's a bit of a grey area of where that responsibility falls, particularly for the really large projects. But we can't support them unless the school is willing to pay for us, but we can't come in until that project budget is live. It's gone a random way. In principle, we employ on open-ended contracts. That is more challenging in the current financial situation. So what we do now is, in terms of the pipeline, I contact projects that I know have a project manager or project administrator costed into a grant, and I just let them know directly about our service. And beforehand, I was kind of going around schools, institutes, and sort of letting them know about the centre, so holding a kind of information session with them. But because the team isn't as large as we'd hoped it was going to be, I'm very aware of us becoming a central service that doesn't have capacity to support. So now I tend to be quite targeted in my promotion of the service. And we kind of contact them at that grant stage to see if we are if they'd like to use our service, and kind of speak about how it can benefit them, because especially if they haven't got 100% costed in, it's a way of accessing fractional support in a much easier way, than potentially more attractive to somebody than a temporary contract. It also they don't have to do the recruitment themselves. They can be involved in it if they want to be involved in it. And so I kind of sort of explain what it is, how it works, what the benefits to them are, and to the project. And then I'm allowed to recruit once I've kind of got confirmation that they'll use our service, but also once the once the grant's been accepted. So it is a little bit of a different way of working now that we kind of have had to take on because there's less appetite for risk at the moment. But yeah, we do try and keep those open-ended contracts, and I have found that they are necessary to kind of really deliver the flexibility of this service, and to kind of respond to that problem of a gap in project management capability. It also helps with a consistent pool who are building their knowledge continually, and that kind of consistency and experience then does flow down to projects. It also really supports a more dynamic resourcing when you've got like a set pool that you know aren't going to leave, and then you can kind of be more creative in how you move people around so you can support as many projects as possible, but also make sure that they've got the right people supporting that project. We work via memorandums of understanding, and these essentially formalise the agreement between the project and my team. And they set out the responsibilities on both sides, but what they also do is clarify contingency during absence. So unfortunately, we had one of our project managers was off for about 3 months on unexpected sick leave, and that has a huge impact. We haven't got the capacity. She was supporting a project at 100%. We don't have the capacity in the team to provide cover, and that is all set out in the memorandum of understanding, that you kind of, like, we'll do what we can, but we can't actually guarantee that we can provide cover, and the expectation is that the payment still comes from them unless it, like, based of course on the kind of duration of that leave. But it is something to really think about because it can really impact the service's unexpected leave. And then we retain central line management, one, because it's an opportunity for project professionals to gain that formal line management experience, but also we find it kind of offers a means of protection of my team to make sure they're being asked to do things at the right grade, they've got that right level of responsibility, and also if they're, say, just deployed at 20%, that work does fit in with that, with the 7 hours that they have. So that's kind of how we're working today, a few of the kind of sort of lessons learned. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing Jen's presentation, which again is further on than us, and also happy to answer any questions and take part in the discussion at the end. But thank you. Thanks, Victoria.
Thanks, Ciara. There are lots of questions coming in, and I would encourage you all to like them if you're interested in hearing a specific answer, because it will help us filter out which ones we go through first. But finally, I will hand over to Jen.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me today. Can I just check with a thumbs up that my slides have come through? Lovely, thank you. Also, there might be a few questions that I've referenced in our presentation, so hopefully I can start knocking off some of those Q&As. So hello, it's nice to meet everybody. I am Jen Siggs. I'm the Head of Research Services for University of Exeter's Cornwall campus. Bless you, whoever just had a cough. And also within my remit is the project delivery team, which is what we call the PRISMs in Exeter. So the first part of this is, if my presentation will work. The animations don't seem to, there we go, got it. So why did we develop a PDT? And this process started back in 2021, pardon me. And many of the arguments that you've heard today and are familiar with in your own world are there, but some of the more enticing points that were put forward was really around the culture of success for project delivery colleagues that were really kind of hidden in pockets. I really liked the diagram that Fleur showed with the dots, because very much echoed in Exeter, where sometimes we just didn't know where people were, they didn't have any colleagues, they weren't connected to anybody, and it wasn't a flourishing environment. We found that our research finance staff were being asked the same question multiple times by different people because there wasn't any culture of supporting each other within project delivery. Obviously, one of the other major costs and benefits of the project delivery team and growing in argument with the financial situation in the sector at the moment is the costs and the cost recovery. So throughout this presentation, it's showing that University of Exeter aim to cost recover our administrators and our coordinators at 90%, and we aim to cost recover our F grade staff, so our managers, at 80%. We do not recover leadership costs, so my costs aren't recovered. It is just considered part of my job, alongside the whole research lifecycle for the projects that are delivered from University of Exeter, based in Cornwall. So externally, it was also a very valid argument to have the project delivery team established. We coordinate very complicated relationships, both nationally and internationally, negotiating and developing funding bids with core funders. And it really builds confidence with funders that we'll do what we say we're going to do as an institution. And we really build confidence with our academics that they feel like they can deliver those expectations too. And it has, we've had instances where the work delivered by our project delivery managers has actually driven forward on additional funding opportunities as well. So how we work here in Exeter, we have four major ways of approaching our service. We offer temporary support, so to kick off a project or to close a project when the staff have left. A bit as Ciara described, we do support projects prior to their launch if they are large and strategic and awkward, but so long as they're faculty funded. We do offer low FTE support, so if it's short term or under 50% is kind of our rule of thumb, then we would suggest that the project management pool is the way to look at it. We do support internal projects. So, for example, we recently updated our, we use Symplectic to go through a profiles initiative and update our website with our academic contacts and information. And that was run by one of our project delivery specialists. And it was a great way actually to develop the pipeline to start the initiative. So about 50% of the work at the start of the project was internally funded. And another core stream of work that we get involved in is bridging support. So if there's a specific event that an academic needs support on delivering, if they need a bridge while they're recruiting to new staff, many different versions of what that bridging support or activity focus support looks like, but we do dip in. So in numbers, we went through the approvals process. We were our director of research here at Exeter, Astrid Wissenberg, is really focused on research culture. And so for her, one of the major arguments was around that cultural environment and supporting individuals and getting to a point where those expertise were not lost and we can support individuals in having a career, a stable career, rather than a rolling amount of fixed term contracts, which is a story we're all familiar with. We were supported by our registrar, and the argument there was the cost recovery. So essentially, we would start to move some core services that are delivered by our post-award team towards the project management structures. Sometimes that would be the pool, sometimes that would be within our other spaces, and I'll talk about that a little in a second. So as of today, this is how we are structured. We have a lot of part-time people in our world, which actually presents opportunity because we have a broader breadth of skill, but also a challenge because, of course, if we've got somebody who's 0.7 and an inquiry comes in for 0.8 and they're already allocated somewhere, you know, the maths can get a bit fun at times. But in the main, this is how we structure ourselves. And what we're finding is that the demand for administrative and coordination, so we call them D and E grade here at Exeter, is outstripping the management support, because what we're finding is that academics want a project manager that is tuned into their research space. They know what they're doing. They're comfortable, confident, part of their research group. And in the main, they are costing 1 FTE at bid stage or 80%. That does fluctuate, and where we do see fractional F grade roles being costed into grants, you know, I've got a bid going in today with one, then that absolutely would be part of the pool remit. So that's how we structure ourselves. And to date, so since September 2023, we have supported 56 projects, which equates to a deployment of 19.15 FTE. And in our pipeline is 31 projects, and that is a total of 9.95 FTE, which is also one of our challenges as well, is I meet with my assistant director and director of research every quarter with an ask. I need more FTE, and so we are in a perpetual cycle of recruitment, which is wonderful because we're growing the pool, we're delivering a great service, academics are really liking us, However, what it's creating is a lot of work for particularly the 3 individuals that are in the F grade space, one of whom is on the call today. So I don't know if Chloe will jump in and mention something about that later. So again, I've summarised a little bit about how we've got to where we've got to. Like I say, the idea was started back in 2021, but really was galvanised in 22 with the business case approved, I think it was June 2023. And throughout that process, we really started to build our pipeline, which was through scoping out potential internal projects that were going to happen anyway, that needed project management support. So rather than going out to, advertise for fractional FTE, we put them through these homes, but also starting to make our bid developers aware of what's going on. And that's both within our research space and our innovation space. It was launched in September 23, and so inducting people, familiarising them, often the candidates that joined us, there were 2 F grade managers that we started with, nothing else, and both of those managers had experience in very specific funding streams, so making them aware of the other funder terms and conditions, and that flexibility in scope was really important. Building the pipeline was absolutely critical so that we can develop sustainability. And we also created the PAM. So for some people who may have gone to the ARMA presentation that we did, the PAM is a project manager's space. It's basically a team site, but it's developed into a bit of a conference now. And this is all of the little dots, as per Fleur's diagram, that have now a space to communicate and collaborate. So even if they're not within our project delivery team, as in the pool of deployed project managers, they are within the wider community of support. This last year has been a real sprint as well. So we've really found ourselves now with a growing operational area. So being a bit more focused on our service offer, developing procedures and policies that work for both us academic staff and our professional services colleagues that we need to work with. Gleaning and gathering feedback so that we know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what people like, what people don't like, promoting our services so that bid developers are aware, and you kind of assume that one group of people know, but actually you're not seeing any opportunities coming through from those spaces, so you have to revisit how you approach it. And you'll note again that I've put the pipeline there, and you'll see a hint that one of the biggest challenges sat in my shoes and Ciara shoes et al. Is following that pipeline. And today, as we sit here, we've got a scheduled meeting in November where the team will all come together. We've got 2 new starts joining us this month as well. And we will, 3 actually, pardon me. We will have continuous improvement discussions around what we need to change, what's working well, what other services need to come into scope, and really what we can do about hearts and minds. And this is a question that I think it was Roz might have asked around academic staff and whether they like people that perhaps aren't their subject specialisms in jumping into their space. Sometimes there's all the time there's a nervousness when they meet one of our qualified PDT members. They actually completely relax and feel like they're held and supported, and they can focus on their research. However, we're in the environment that all HEIs are in at the moment with regard to cost saving, doing things differently, looking at innovation opportunities for efficiencies. We're a voice in a lot of that. So some people can see us as threatening to their research group or threatening to their space. And we need to make it really clear that whilst we are a central function, we are here to support. So it's been an interesting dynamic, that one, to manage. Just because some people ask some questions about what's typical, I've grabbed this slide and put it in. It wasn't in my original presentation, and I will include it for circulation. But you can just see that we cover all the different faculties, including research services. You can see roughly the FTEs that we're working on. There is a doctoral college. We have an administrator that works. We are a co-I on a doctoral centre with, I think Edinburgh's the lead actually. And we have a 0.2 D grade that supports that endeavour from an Exeter perspective. However, in all of our doctoral centres, there's a 1 FTE manager costed, which would be separate from that, from our scope here at the pool. So have a look at those at your leisure. And again, this is kind of our modus operandi as to how Exeter cost our research project, our project delivery team specialists into bids. Anything over £1 million, anything with international partnerships, anything that's £2 million for STEM or 1 million for HAS, anything with a complex procurement. So you're buying some shipping containers that contain very scary things, as sometimes happens with academics, and also how long you need that project support for, and what the specific need is. So we talk regularly about making it very simple for bid managers so that they don't feel overwhelmed about having to get it right, and have an open door policy where bid managers can come and talk to us and say, I'm thinking of costing this, what do you think? And we'll say, oh, a bit too much there and not enough there. But our D and E grades are deployed without an F grade on bids. Again, to keep the cost recovery elements balanced and also help the academic deliver their funding, their research within funding caps. So yeah, lots of tinkering on that model as well. We've changed it many times. So a very quick summary of the challenges here, and really there's three. One is the financial. As you can tell, I'm constantly monitoring the pipeline, always driving the business. There's a real business development approach to how you deliver the service. You have to deliver your bottom line. And it took me a really long time to set up the processes to be able to actually recharge staff back who are on multiple funders. So that was only achieved in July this year. So we had months where it was really ad hoc, almost a year. But this academic year, we've now got one standard process that everybody's following, and it will actually affect the whole university in a positive way. The change management, and again, I mentioned that heart and minds thing. That's both for bid managers and for academics, and also making sure that the other members of the PAM, so the community of project specialists, not those that sit within the project delivery team, feel like they are supported and together, but there is a difference between our jobs and their jobs. And often I get an email from people whose contracts are coming to an end saying, oh, I'd like to move into the pool, please. And I don't just have a job that I can offer you to come to, and I would love to, because I'm sure you're very good at your job. But it's really tricky to manage that expectation and that reality. So it's quite a lot of excitement about this opportunity, but at the same time, we have to kind of manage expectations, and it's a hard act to juggle. And I have also put on there around HR supporting people. This job is not for everyone. Again, back to Fleur's presentation, with that depth of understanding that project managers usually have within a project is really special, and it takes a special skill of an individual to have that capacity to keep those plates spinning across a wider piece. And so we have found that one of our most talented project managers actually took redundancy from the institution because she didn't like this complexity of plate spinning. So my advice would be to really push that when you're in your recruitment space. Really help to understand, are you that person that's excited by organising the chaos, or are you that person that really likes to be settled and know and have control of each element of a project? Neither are wrong. Things are right for different projects and different academics, but they really are our main challenges. So a bit of a whistle stop so that we have enough time for questions, but please do drop me a note if you have any further questions, and I will hand back to whoever I'm handing to for Q&A.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, so we've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. Can I just ask if there are other people on this call who are part of a pool at a different university, or with in the pool that we've just heard about from Ciara and Jen, just to make yourself known in the chat. And also with all of these questions, please do feel free to chip in with your experience in your pool. I've looked at the likes on the questions we've had in the chat, so I'm going to start with those. And Stacey had a question around understanding the costing and charging model, i.e. are costs recovered via DI with timesheets provided for audit purposes, or perhaps via DA, indirect rates, and or via a track facility. And she'd also be interested to know how annual leave or sickness play into this. Chloe has already helpfully commented that they use timesheets, but if there are others, examples, then please chip in. Jen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it was. So yes, it is a DI'd cost and fully audited. We now have a timesheet that's suitable for all funders, EU and UKRI and charities if required. The question around annual leave, sickness and personal development is interesting. One of the developments that we did around, so the timesheets are submitted, I then have a joyous task of putting everything in the right areas. So if an individual is a fractional, I don't know, let's say 0.7, and they're on 3 projects, I then fractionally split out the time that they have not been at work, so annual leave, across each of those projects. Fortunately, I now have some whizzy-bangy spreadsheets, but it did take a minute.
Thanks. Lorelei?
Hi, yeah, this is something we were considering when putting a proposal together, and while we haven't implemented yet, then we were thinking about how it was raised by one of our program managers within the institution, actually, that everybody has an expectation of a certain number of days professional development a year. We have involvement in different kind of committees and kind of administrative roles across the organisation. Everybody involved in kind of like institutional meetings and away days and the like. So we wanted to make sure that everybody had the equal opportunity to do that. So you weren't expected to be kind of like fully deployed on research projects at all time. So we've looked at how we can make sure that that kind of flexibility of time is built in, and we're looking at kind of like I guess like a markup really. So for 20% of somebody's time, it will cost you 25% of their time. So that in that way, we expect to be deploying people, I think probably a maximum of 80%, but the kind of 100% will be fully funded. I did take some discussions with finance to how that will work across different funders, and obviously it will be different for different funders, but that's kind of the principle we're using in terms of how we make sure that everything, ensure that kind of professional development and other kind of responsibilities can be built into these roles.
Thank you. Ciara?
Yeah, so we use enhanced timesheet system, which we have to use for all projects, regardless of if you're in my team or employed a different way. And that kind of is the formal timesheet that you pop in, and it's required for EC, and we use it for UKRI as well sometimes. And then my team also have their own personal timesheets where they track their time, which is not to like check up that they're doing the hours they should be doing, but more so that I have an understanding across the team of how many hours are spent on professional development, how many hours are spent like contributing to our department. We have like quarterly departmental meetings, and how much time is spent against my team, partly for that, just so I have that understanding, but also for project to come to me and be like, oh, I think they're spending like too much time, say, on this sort of stuff. We've kind of got a record of it to go back and say yes, no. The other reason why it's really important to cost the actual time that you're spending on, I found, is a lot of, if it's short-term support, it often gets extended, and it means that I can go back and be like, actually, yeah, more than happy to extend, but this person's generally spending more like 25% of time than 20% of time, or in certain cases where I've needed some additional support, I can be like, they're not quite spending the full amount of time costed there. Why don't we split it and move it on to another project that really needs it? So I find having something that's less formal also really, really helpful. And then salaries get charged directly via payroll to the projects. Is how we but that has been, a bit like Jen said, a nightmare to get sorted. And it is still, they introduced a new way of how we do that in a few months ago, and now no salary. Like, I don't know what's going on. So every time the university introduces a new system, it has quite a big impact as well on the team. So we're currently just going through that, but that's vaguely kind of how we work it out. Oh, sorry, I think I did say annual leave. We expect the project to kind of absorb that. There has been issues where, say, someone's on for 2 months and they've got 2 weeks of annual leave, that's when it's an issue. When it's the shorter term deployments and they happen to have a couple of weeks annual leave in that time. But generally, for most of them, it's never really caused any issues, and projects are quite happy. Also, if it's short term support, they kind of want any kind of, like, they have no other option. Is kind of the advantage with short term supports. They will be a little more lenient. But and then when people go off sick, which seems to have happened quite a lot in my team, and that can cause issues. Projects generally are quite understanding though. It happens, and I think they know that it could happen to them regardless. What we do is have a meeting every 2 weeks where we come together as a team and we kind of have a good understanding of what each other's doing. So there is a way to keep each other up to date of what's going on, and kind of they fill out a progress update so we know what they've been doing. So if they do go off, at least we've got an understanding of where they are. We've got all important links stored in that notebook, and just so that we can provide some sort of contingency, or at least an understanding of where things are as best as we can if that happens.
Brilliant, thank you. We've still got lots of questions to go through, so I might cherry pick some of our speakers for responding to this, but please also do comment in the chat if you have relevant examples to share. Pamela asked, and Jen, you talked about this, so I'm going to give you this question. To what extent were there concerns from academics or PIs about wanting someone with a sort of level of disciplinary specific expertise, and how you've kind of got around that? It also relates to what Fleur was saying about broad and shallow versus narrow and deep.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the excuses, for want of a better phrase, or the barriers that I receive from academics don't just include that one. I had one about social capital this week. So does an individual have the social capital to be able to gather timesheets from academics in a research group? So they come through thick and fast, and it's awful to say, I went to HSBC Bank as a graduate and did a sales postgraduate scheme thing, and I'm so grateful now that I did that, because it was all about overcoming objections. And actually, as I said, once the team are introduced, so one prime example, we have a UKRI cross-council grant. It has some PPI in it, so some patient engagement. And the academic is an engineer. He's working with co-Is or project leads in a different institution. And of course, reputationally, he wants to make sure that the PPI is going well. Exeter are responsible for that. He isn't in the health and life cycle, life science faculty, so he doesn't quite have the same wraparound support as one of those academics. Hannah is one of our E-grade coordinators. She has done PPE in a previous life. It was a case of an introduction. Professor Pavic, it's up to you. I'm going to introduce you to Hannah. If you think it can work, great. If you don't think it's going to work, it's not a problem. We can look at it and we can go out to recruitment for that specific point 4, noting that it'll take you 2 months to get someone, and Hannah's sat here now. And lo and behold, they meet Hannah. Oh, Hannah knows exactly what Hannah's talking about. I actually feel quite comfortable.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to come to Fleur and Lorelei, because you're at the opposite end of the journey to Jen and Ciara. There's a question from Sylvine, which this is a lot of work to be doing alongside everything else that you are already doing on a daily basis. So how do you justify the time that you're spending on it, especially when your pools are not yet established?
I can start if you like. I think, as I say, the Wellcome Trust programme that was focused on research management is one that I've been working on 50% for the last year and a half, I think. So that did kind of, like, I guess, even though this wasn't an objective within that, it kind of was a kind of similar enough kind of in terms of what we were trying to achieve, that I think it kind of justified, or kind of it grew out of that. And yeah, I guess when we were putting the business case together, it was quite a intensive process. I guess it's the end justifies the means, in that we were kind of keen to get this moving, so we had to put a bit of extra time into it. But I think, as I say, having kind of the senior leadership support behind it, I guess that also meant that it was my line manager who was kind of like supporting with this, so she was kind of very happy for me to be spending the time doing this alongside the project, which was like I say, had very associated aims. So I don't think it was too much of a distraction from kind of what the overall kind of purpose of what I was doing at the time was.
Thank you, Fleur.
Yes, I guess you have to be a bit canny and do stuff sort of by hook or by crook. Yes, if you were trying to set this up and you were 100% costed to a project, it would be very, very difficult to justify the amount of time that you were doing on it. Obviously, I now have the role of PRISMs manager, so I have a mandate and I have time to do it, but I didn't before that role was created. But things like the research culture fund that came through, I mean, that was what kind of kicked the whole thing off, was that, you know, there was a little bit of money available. It wasn't only open for academics to bid for. And so when I said, oh yeah, I'll ask for some money for my time to set up this network, and thought I better not just spend it all on cake. I'll do some I'll make a report, so I'll do a proper thing. So I did have, you know, a small amount of my time paid for. Then it was like 1 day a week for 6 months, and then I got kind of other gobbets of money, you know, to kind of progress that. It's like, oh, you know, I could do a little bit more work on kind of working on these recommendations. So I kind of, it was a little bit of a patchwork. And also because I was in the position where you know, things were changing. I was fractionally you know, I had a whatever it was, 0.6 or something FTE on my main research project that was going up a bit, but I you know, because of childcare changing arrangements, I had some more space in the calendar, so I could do that on top of. So it sort of ends up being, you know, quite a nice happenstance of circumstances all sort of came about, but it's also just being opportunistic and being like, okay, well, maybe you'd say, I don't know, I've got a quieter bit on my project, so they can have some of their money back. You know, I'll take a bit of my FTE off that project if there was an opportunity to be paid for the time. But yeah, I do think you cannot set this up without someone actually being properly part of their job. You can't do this off the side of your desk, for sure.
No, that would be too taxing. Nobody has enough hours in their day for that. It does sound broadly like all four of you have benefited from a kind of broader desire to investigate research culture or institute cultural change within your institutions. That plus the argument for cost recovery seems to be the winning arguments here. Oksana has a question around using pooled models to manage and deliver, for example, doctoral training grants and programs, and other sort of funded programs. Briefly speaking, I'm going to pick Jen again. You mentioned a doctoral training program?
Yes. So essentially, the program is led, I think it's Edinburgh, I'm sure it is. And there's a program manager at Edinburgh, and that would generally be the kind of model that we would have at Exeter, where there's an F grade or a G grade project manager that's working alongside an academic. But from an Exeter's perspective, supporting the co-investigator on that grant, she is supporting with the training package delivery. So the every element that Exeter is involved in with regard to coordinating the room bookings, etc., is all done at 0.2 FTE for the duration and lifetime of the CDT. So yeah, it's and we will cost on, you know, Marie Curie doctoral networks as well. So however, again, there's often that balance and check. And if we are costing an F grade into a grant, then usually we would cost all the administrative staff, even if it's fractional, underneath that, you know, that specific grant, and that would not be within the project management pool remit, or the PDT remit. That would be within the kind of life cycle remit, if you will. And it's worth noting that the project administrator that I've just described was part of our match funding offer. It is a faculty funded role, so we are not recovering costs on that from UKRI.
Thank you. Fleur?
Yeah, the CDT one is an interesting one. At the moment, on what I've put forward, I have said that we would include costing in CDT, DTP type support as part of the roles. That is particularly because it's been picked up by our research, the central research office, that York doesn't have a consistent way of costing in how we support those types of grants. So there's wild variation across the university, and grants going through that have basically no support and then surprisingly getting into problems. So I'm trying to be helpful because somebody has pointed that out as a problem, and I know that that's a problem. So it seems to me that is you know, another way that I can kind of help and be supportive about that. But probably in the longer term, I think that's an opportunity to look at, okay, how do we, you know, what is the level of support that there should be on any one doctoral training grant? How do we do that consistently? Potentially in the future, maybe there would be almost like a sub pool, perhaps, of people just to manage the CDTs, because it's quite a specialist area. So yeah, for now I'm talking about kind of using them as part of the pool, but I'm aware that might not necessarily be like a long-term solution.
Thank you. Sorry,
it's a real interesting point around standardization. So we're getting a couple of pushes from a couple of directors in certain spaces around using the project delivery team to standardize how research projects are managed. And at the moment, I'm pushing back on that with Chloe and others' support, because actually there's, don't get me wrong, a CDT, you know, and funded terms and conditions, there are certain things that you have to standardize to be able to, you know, deliver what you say you're going to do with minimal risk. But some directors want to see everybody using Microsoft as a way to manage their project, or everybody using this platform. And we're saying that's not right. You can't put apples and pears next to each other and expect to get the same result if you put them through the, you know, the same press at the same weight. So I really welcome other people's thoughts around that.
Thank you. We've just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to compress the next two questions because they're similar, and I'm going to direct it to Ciara. This is around downtime, or when project members or project administrators aren't allocated to projects, and what happens with their time when they're not on a dedicated project, and how this kind of impacts potential cost recovery.
So it hasn't happened, so we're quite lucky, I suppose, in the fact that it hasn't happened. There is, so we are in Edinburgh Research Office, and they have a number of projects that they're running, like internal projects. So what we would do is they would largely probably just support an internal project, which it can't be cost recovered, but the department who would be, I suppose, underwriting that salary would be gaining from the support. So we do kind of have an ability to fill downtime, because a project could end and it doesn't mean that the next one's going to be there to start the next day. That's not the way the world works. There is also a lot of, and we are trying to set up Victoria and I are trying to set up a project professional community of practice at Edinburgh, and that requires a huge amount of work that kind of is falling to me, which is fine. But it would, you know, there's things like that going on all the time that you could definitely use, particularly the project administration. It could happen that, you know, that would be really helpful. If I know it's coming up, I tend to kind of put out an email via our college research managers. Edinburgh has 3 very large distinct colleges, and saying that we've got some capacity if anybody needs any kind of short-term support, and that tends to kind of just remind people that it's there, and then you often get some pickup around that. So you kind of also plan for when I know there's downtime coming. But I would say there was like nights when I was kept awake being like, I've got no projects and I've got all these people whose capacity is coming, and then suddenly like 2 days later it can be you're turning projects down. So it does change really, really quickly. It's really dynamic. Things move so quickly. So yeah, there is yes, it can happen. It hasn't happened, but there has been points when I really thought it was going to happen, and I was really worried about the impact that would have on us seeing if we were failing. And I think now that we've done a year and we showed that we can do it, I've kind of had that conversation and it's kind of been like, you've proven you can do it. It's not something to be that concerned about anymore. If it doesn't happen, that is also fine, because there is enough work across the university for people to be doing and supporting with. And we know that if there is downtime, it's likely not to be very long, because we kind of, you know, that's what the pilot has shown us. So I think you just have to be aware of it, but it's not worth losing sleep over it like I did. It's probably what I would say, because it does change really, really quickly as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to all of our speakers.